The world faces major challenges. FIU has the solutions and top talent to make an impact.
Here in Washington, D.C., we're achieving results through people, policy, and partnerships. We're making great strides in Congress, at federal research agencies, and from our own FIU in D.C. on Capitol Hill.
We're bringing our A-game to transform our hometown and the world.
As a top-ranked Carnegie Research Institution and the fourth largest university in the country, FIU is uniquely positioned to help our federal partners on key challenges. They invest in our research initiatives. They visit our campuses in Miami and DC, and they use FIU in DC as their own access point for success.
Our students and faculty see FIU in DC as a lab, where ideas from the classroom are put into practice on a real-time global stage.
And our dynamic hub on Capitol Hill punches above its weight class, providing faculty researchers a platform to assert leadership in national dialogues and giving our alumni and visiting partners a place to call their own.
So are you ready? Ready to make an impact? Ready for your next horizon?
Welcome to FIU in Washington, D.C.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carlos Becerra with FIU in Washington, D.C. We're glad to welcome you today for this homecoming week discussion with so many of our amazing alumni and focused on issues that are crossing the globe, but also the Western Hemisphere. So some substance, but also a lot of pride, considering these individuals and many of you on the line as well, whether it be students or alumni, are already out there in the field and tackling amazing things. So I think you'll leave with a bit of pride that FIU is also in the game, if you will. First off, we do hope everyone is healthy and safe. We know it's been a very trying year. I think that's an understatement, but we're glad you can join us today and hopefully get some value out of this discussion. I'd like to acknowledge some of our key folks that we'll hear from a little later. Also on the line are Vice President of Governmental Relations, Michelle Palacio, Dean John Stack of our Green School of International and Public Affairs, Luis Guillermo Solis, the Acting Director of our Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. And you'll have a chance to hear from them and Dr. Rosenberg a little later. Before we begin, a little great shout out to our friends at the FIU Alumni Association for helping us put this on, in addition to the Green School and helping us promote this discussion. Before we go on, if those that are joining us can just quickly drop into the chat a bit of introduction of whether you're a student, what you're studying, or an alum where you're working, just so we have a good chance to see who's there. So FIU in Washington, D.C., for those that may not be aware, that are just learning about us recently, obviously we're in the nation's capital representing FIU. So as FIU seeks to pursue top 50 public university status, we aim to achieve solutions through our people, policy, and partnerships. We can progress through the slides now, actually. In particular, when it comes to Latin America and the Caribbean, I think most on this call would agree you'll not find a university that's more invested in providing solutions for the region. We don't know of any institution that has a larger concentration of scholars, students, and faculty from the region or focused on the region and courses. And that's a point of pride. I know you'll hear about that from Dean Stack. This is university-wide, but of course led by our Green School and in particular, two of its institutes, the Gordon Institute and the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. You can progress the slide. Whether it be justice reform, forensics, Central American security, cybersecurity, and in other colleges and schools, be it forensics, wildlife trafficking, infrastructure issues, etc. And none of this could be possible without the strong support of our federal partners, whether it be the State Department, USAID, or so many other international partners that are here in Washington as well. Of course, we're also about our students, and many of you and all of our panelists, we're excited to welcome them because they themselves directly have been engaged in mentoring so many of our students. Last year was another banner year for us here in DC. We, in some way or another, hosted about 1,600 students, whether it be the 100 or so that were interning in Washington or the balance of that were visiting for shorter term seminars or enjoying our virtual programming. And this fall, we're pleased to have launched the Hamilton Scholars, thanks to the generosity of a great friend of the university and one of our own family member, Ruth Hamilton. These students are 10 from all, probably about 50% from the Green School, but the rest from other colleges and schools that are interning in DC for DC organizations and also enrolled in courses and really making an impact. This is made possible, this program and so many others are made possible through the generosity of our alumni and donors. So if in the spirit of homecoming or year-end gift giving, we wanted to make sure you all know that you all can also take part in sponsoring some of our students through our Make a Difference DC fund. And if you haven't met him yet, on the line, dialed in is our wonderful Associate Director, Eric Feldman, that really helps a lot of this magic happen. So please feel free to get in contact with Eric if you're also interested in hosting a student. And the next slide will show you, we're very pleased, and you'll hear about this from our Vice President, the reach that our students have taken all across the Hill, well beyond just Florida, whether it be interning or working in these offices. And last year we hit another milestone, a great one, where we had 5 chiefs of staff that were FIU alumni. So without further ado, I want to introduce our amazing panelists and get this conversation started. You might know that we have about 3,000 alumni in the DC area, but today we're going to go a little deeper with these 3 amazing individuals that are still doing amazing work in DC or engaged indirectly from afar and definitely left their mark. First off, we have Eliot Pedrosa, who currently is serving as the U.S. Executive Director of the Inter-American Development Bank, formerly was a partner at Greenberg Traurig in Miami, and former chair of the Green School Advisory Board. Viviana Bovo is the Senior Advisor for Western Hemisphere Affairs to Senator Marco Rubio, great champion of FIU, and she has served as a longtime staffer to the Senator from his days back in the state legislature. And Tyrik McKeiver, currently Vice President, Global Strategy and Communications for Global Financial Crimes Division at MUFG, Japanese bank, and he'll tell us a little bit more about that, but formerly was an appointee in the Obama administration at the State Department, both at the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, as well as Deputy Secretary for Management and Budget and advisor to him. And one of our former FIU interns. So we have an intern success story here in the flesh. So for those that are dialed in, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat. We'll be monitoring that as much as we can. But just to get things kicked off, if we can start with Eliot, Tyrik, and Viviana, a little bit more about what you do, or what's your role currently. And since it is homecoming week, let's connect to those good old days. How do you think FIU helped you in preparing you for these exciting roles that you do have? Eliot.
Great, thank you, Carlos. First of all, thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. This is a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun to reconnect with FIU and with you and Dean Stack and President Rosenberg. Thank you to both of you, and thank you, President Solis, for your work with the Latin America and Caribbean Center and here for this program. My role, Carlos, is to represent the United States on the board of directors of the Inter-American Development Bank. Unlike a commercial bank, our bank is owned by 48 sovereign member countries. The United States is the single largest shareholder of the bank, and as a country, we own 30% of the shares. That's about triple the next largest shareholder, so we are by far the biggest shareholder of the bank. And unlike a commercial bank, our board of executive directors actually has to vote and approve every loan that the bank makes. So as a result, whereas a commercial bank board might meet every quarter, we meet about once a week, and we have a number of board committees that also meet about once a week. So it's not only a full-time job for me, but I lead a small team of counselors and assistants, one of whom is another fellow FIU alum, who help me both analyze the projects that the bank is thinking about financing, and then liaise with the various departments and agencies of the federal government that might have equities that are impacted by the project. Once we've done that and we've collected views from what I think of as our client, the US government, we decide on a position and we work to persuade our colleagues in bank staff as well as our fellow shareholders to try to align themselves with our views. So it's one part finance, but it's one part advocacy and it's another part diplomacy. And in terms of how FIU has has helped me. There are three things that come to mind. Number one, of course, the academic preparation, to be able to assimilate large quantities of data quickly, understand how the pieces work together, and then clearly and effectively communicate with relevant stakeholders. Second, being comfortable in a completely and richly multicultural and diverse environment where everyone is from a different country and is bringing different values and considerations to the table. And number three, and this is something that Carlos, you and I did together, was my service on the Model United Nations. Because I would say almost maybe half of my job, 40% of my job, is almost exactly like an extended Model UN simulation. And since that was absolutely one of my favorite experiences at FIU, I count myself pretty lucky to have a job where I get to relive that experience every day.
Wonderful. Tyrik?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ty. Thanks, Carlos, Dean Stack, and others for the kind invitation to be a part of this impressive panel of FIU alum. Happy homecoming, everyone, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm really happy to be here. It's hard to believe that I finished, graduated FIU in 2005, so making it 15 years ago. And you're right, Carlos, I was part of the early class of FIU interns in DC, which really helped me launch my career in public service and in government. So some of the learned lessons I took away from my experience at FIU, well, one is that I was part of the early classes of folks that had an FIU football team. So that was an exciting time and good memories. I think the first season of the football team was my sophomore year, so my second year at FIU. And I just remember how much energy there was around that launch and that kickoff of that team that season. And so, you know, I've had a varied experience since I graduated from FIU, but another memory from my first years at FIU is I started fall semester of 2001. And so during, you know, that first semester, the tragic event of September 11th happened during one of my first classes with former President Wolf, and he was a former ambassador. So sitting through those classes, going through a life-changing, world-shifting, world-shaping event like 9/11 and those terrorist attacks, it really helped me focus my efforts in both my academic research, but also where I wanted to grow as a person about how using those lessons and experiences and sharing them with the rich global community of students that were my cohort that year. So that forever shaped my experience and helped me really understand the world of international security policy, terrorism, intelligence, and things like that. You know, from a big picture perspective, FIU helped me really understand to have a global perspective on the way that I approach life and learning and things like that. You know, as Eliot mentioned, the multicultural aspect of learning from our, you know, fellow students was really informative. And also just really the interconnected nature of people and policies in the geopolitical landscape was really, really beneficial to me. I think I'll just leave this bit on, I'll end on this bit. In my last year at FIU, you know, I learned from an ambassador in residence or diplomat in residence that was on campus that semester. And lo and behold, 10 years later, as I'm working as a diplomat, working at the US Africa Policy Summit with ambassadors from around the world, mostly from African nations, I ran into that same diplomat in residence at a meeting, and we had a really good conversation. And so that the arc of folks who are involved in your academic upbringing and then have stayed, you know, in contact throughout your career is one of those just great stories that only you can experience with an FIU education. So thanks for allowing me to be here today.
There you go. And glad you mentioned the Diplomat in Residence program. That's a very successful program, thanks to the collaboration with the State Department, ensures that South Florida person is at FIU. Viviana Bovo joining us today by telephone. So for the audience, you won't be seeing her video, but she is here with us, and she was excited to share with us a little bit more about your role on the Hill and how FIU prepared you.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you so much to the entire FIU family. I call them family, as I have two children that also graduated from FIU, and my husband also graduated, so we are a big, proud alumni FIU family. And I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity, not just to join you today, but for the homecoming is a big deal. So thank you. And I am humbled by having graduated from FIU. I am the Western Hemisphere advisor for Senator Marco Rubio. It's going to be 10 years now that I have been working for the senator in the U.S. Congress. And I'll share this with you. I think it's important that as a student at FIU, I believe Tyrik mentioned something that I was also going to mention. I was there during the year 2001 when 9/11 happened. And I happened to be taking a class, an international relations class with Dr. Gamarra, who is an outstanding professor. I have great memories of all the classes that I took with him. And I had an opportunity to exchange the different views, ideas, and understand a lot of the background from many of the students, the exchange students that were in those classes with me. And those interactions and those ideas really mold me and allow me to see a lot of the things that we do in U.S. Congress, in which, as you all know, we have to work in a bipartisan way with many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Sometimes we have to work on very tough and difficult issues, but understanding the mindset and the different thoughts on how we tackle issues, always finding a middle ground, especially on many of the world issues that we're facing today that might be a little bit more difficult. I believe my experience at FIU gave me that ground approach on how to tackle many of these issues. And like I said, I work for the senator. The senator is a chairman of the committee, the subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere for the Foreign Relations Committee. And in that role, he chairs the Committee on Transnational Organized Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women Issues, which is a very broad title, but allows me as a staffer to work on many of these issues and also travel the region and do oversight on the funding that is provided through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to many of these countries in the Western Hemisphere that are our allies and also our friends. So with that, thank you once again for this opportunity, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Viviana, why don't we use your segueing into some of the substance of the exciting initiatives you all are working on these days. And but before we do, you've mentioned Professor Gamarra, Tyrik mentioned President Wolf, late President Wolf, and just to keep the audience in suspense, these were two professors that made an impact on them. We will actually be hearing from Eliot's favorite professor. I'll leave you with that. But Viviana, you mentioned Central American security, and we know that current priority of the senators is a current bill, Central American Women and Children Compact. You want to touch on a little bit more about what may be moving on the Hill in regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're going through the legislative process of approving the National Defense Authorization Act. And on Central America, I would say that the U.S. Congress has taken an active role in shaping U.S. strategy for engagement in Central America now for many years. It's a very diverse region that I had the opportunity to travel. Some of these countries, not all, but these countries face a lot of economic security, governance issues, crime, poverty, corruption. So strengthening our ties is very important to the United States and the relations that we can continue to build. And we have a few pillars of the U.S. strategy on Central America, including how to create more prosperity for these countries, governance, security. We have the State Department, INL, the Department of Defense, they support efforts to prevent crime and violence. And with that, Senator Rubio introduced a bipartisan piece of legislation last year that is called the Central American Women and Children Protection Act of 2019. The legislation was introduced in both the House and the Senate and is right now waiting to get into the markup. For those that don't know these little technical terms, is placing the bill on the agenda on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we're hoping that happens before the end of the year. The legislation is intended to help decrease violence against women and children in the Western Hemisphere, specifically authorizes the Secretary of State and USAID to enter into bilateral agreements with the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to provide resources that will help secure and create safe communities. And like I said, it is our hope that this legislation is passed this year. It has an overwhelming amount of support on both from both Democrats and Republicans. And part of the bill is included in the NDAA, in the National Defense Authorization Act, but the idea will be to pass the entire piece of legislation. It's Senate Bill 1781, for those who would like to Google a little bit more about the bill.
Okay. Tyrik, you've actually, I didn't go deep on the intro, but you've straddled federal and then federal Congress, administration appointee, city government, working in the city of New York for the deputy mayor, now the corporate side. How have all of these varied experiences really helped you in the world of financial crimes and compliance? It's a unique blend of experiences.
No, yeah, thanks, Carlos. I actually didn't touch on a lot of my work history, but you know, I spent my first days in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill working for former U.S. Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, and then went off to work on the Homeland Security Committee for the chairman at the time. So I was there for almost 5 years, and then went on to work in various capacities at the Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, and then as a presidential appointee at the State Department, where I worked in the front offices for the Assistant Secretary of INL and for the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources. So I covered a lot of issues, including rule of law, criminal justice capacity building, countering violent extremism issues, and really focused my efforts in helping the administration continue to build coalitions and efforts globally to tackle these challenges. So I'll speak mostly to the importance of global cooperation and coordination. As you've seen, from COVID-19 to climate change to combating terrorist groups or other nefarious global networks, you know, this is critical to our everyday life. And so all of those learned lessons and the policies and programs that I worked on at the federal level, you know, I began to work for the mayor of New York City after the administration, after the Obama administration ended, came to New York City to work for the Office for International Affairs. They handled all of the city's engagements on the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations. New York City is home to the largest diplomatic community in the world, with 193 permanent missions and 115 consulates right here in the city. So those everyday interactions and engagements with diplomats and the diplomatic corps were critical relationships for the city of New York and for the mayor. So after I left the mayor's office, I joined MUFG, which is Mitsubishi Financial Group. It is the 5th largest financial institution in the world. It has over 180,000 employees that are, you know, based in we operate in all regions of the world. And I actually sit in the front office of the Global Financial Crimes Division, where I oversee communications and strategic initiatives for the global head of the Financial Crimes Division. My team is located globally, and we basically oversee the first integrated global communications strategy and all related products. So helping not only employees raise awareness of financial crimes compliance among our employees, but also helping the bank prevent or mitigate against any financial terrorist groups, money laundering, and or enforcing OFAC sanctions as they're being regulated in the different jurisdictions that we operate. So a lot of the programs and policies and standards I oversee contribute to the global compliance and risk management control framework of our bank. And we deliver that through many platforms and activities that we deploy internationally. So it's been a really interesting time to work in this space. There are challenges across the board, especially in this COVID-19 virtual environment, to making sure that customers, clients, and the bank is doing what it can to protect, prevent, or investigate any nefarious, actions or activities by criminal networks that try to use or leverage or exploit the financial institutions and financial service industries for their gain. So I've taken a lot of the learned lessons from across the various places I've learned and worked and putting them into practice in my everyday job.
Wonderful. Thank you. Eliot, bit of a twofer because we have one of our students that has dropped a question in the chat. But first, what is hot at the bank now? What's been in the news, obviously, is the election of a new president. A good friend of FIU, as it turns out. Mauricio Clavera Carón started on the 1st, I believe. I'm curious, so first part, how does that change the bank now that this is the first time an American is leading the bank? And then if you can also segue in there, because I know even in his first few days, COVID is something that the bank is squarely focused on. So Noah Tyrik, which is actually one of our new Hamilton scholars, has asked about that and the bank's role there. Eliot?
Great, thank you, Carlos, and congratulations, Noah, and I'm happy to tackle both questions. So yes, this is the first time that an American will be leading the bank as its president. The IDB elects a new president every 5 years, but in the 60-year history of the IDB, there had only been 4 presidents before Mauricio. So to give you a sense of scale, from 1960 until 2020, there were 11 US presidents. There were only 4 presidents of the Inter-American Development Bank. And most of those presidents served upwards of 15 years in terms of at least 3 consecutive terms. One of the things that Mauricio included in his campaign and that we publicized and pushed very strongly was a commitment to restore the governance of the institution to where it really belongs. And that's with my board and the Board of Governors, which is made up of the finance ministers of the 48 member countries and only meets once a year, but is really tasked with setting the strategic policy goals of the institution. With Mauricio promising to serve only a single 5-year term, it both returns authority where it belongs to the representatives of the member countries, but also creates a sense of urgency. Because in order for him to have a lasting impact on the bank, he's got to do in 5 years what it's taken other presidents to do in 15. And so it means that he has hit the ground running on October 1st, has already laid out a very aggressive plan for his first 120 days. And we'll be trying to work with him, both to support him as a shareholder, as a representative of a shareholder, but also to hold him to his promises and to his word, because after all, he works for the board of directors and we represent the biggest shareholder on that board. And so it's important for us to show that we can hold one of our own accountable to meeting the goals that he's laid out. In terms of Noah's question, certainly COVID-19 took my bank, just like it's taken everyone else, for a loop. And on March 16th, we went to full telework mode. We have actually not been in the office since March 16th, with the exception of the day of the election, in which we actually used the offices as a staging area for the election. And the election was conducted virtually using Microsoft Teams, but Mauricio was actually in my office or in the office of my deputy for his campaign speech and remarks that day. But we've had to shift the focus of our lending for this year much more into the health sector. And so very early, I would say within April or beginning of May, as a board, we approved a resolution to give management some flexibility in terms of reallocating dollars that had previously been set aside for projects in different areas into a more health-focused portfolio, and also to reallocate dollars from different types of products that we have that take a longer period of time to disperse. We have loans that can be in disbursement for up to 5 years as money gets paid out as the project advances. And what we did is move money into different types of products that disperse much more rapidly and provide an injection of liquidity into the financial system. And so with governments in the region faced really with a squeezing on their fiscal priorities, both by a decline in revenue coming from less taxes on less economic activity during the downturn, to an increase in demand, both for health services, for unemployment, and other type of social safety net benefits. With the countries in the region facing those two sides of that vice, squeezing in at them at the same time, we thought it was important to be able to accelerate disbursements and provide additional liquidity early in the crisis. We're now moving into sort of the next phase, which is the longer term economic recovery. And obviously that will have to change the way that we do our loans into the next year and really through the next 5-year period to make sure that we're focusing on job creation, to make sure that we're focusing on long-term investments that can increase productivity in the region, get people back to work, and make sure that we live up to our mission statement, which is ultimately to improve lives.
Thank you. So we're going to now go ahead and we have a question from one of our audience members, Purina Anton. I think we can unmute you.
Thank you, Carlos. And thanks to everyone on the call. It's really inspiring to see FIU Panthers doing some really, really impactful and important work. So my question really has to do with the 2020 election and how you all see the impact of the election on Western Hemisphere policy. Do you see it having a change in the direction? What can we expect to see if there's a transition and if there isn't?
Eliot, Viviana, maybe to get us started. Thoughts?
Well, I can take a first stab and tell you what I hope to see, and that is what I hope to see is that regardless of what the result of the election is on November 3rd, that the United States will retain the high degree of focus and the really unprecedented level of engagement that the Trump administration has shown towards Latin America and the Caribbean. From inviting the presidents or prime ministers of 5 Caribbean countries to Mar-a-Lago in one of the first summits of that kind between a US president and presidents or prime ministers of Caribbean nations, to nominating a president for the IDB, to engaging directly with other allies in the region, providing support to interim President Juan Guaido of Venezuela. I mean, I think the president has shown a desire to be intensely focused on Latin America and the Caribbean in a way that previous presidents have not that they haven't wanted to do, but that they haven't been able to do because they've been pulled away by crises in other parts of the world. You heard both Tyrik and Viviana talk about 9/11. I think President George W. Bush would have liked nothing more than to make investments in Latin America and the Caribbean and improve the neighborhood that we live and work in. But obviously his attention was pulled away. President Obama's attention was pulled away. And I think President Trump, in part by his focus on the dangers of being so dependent on Asia and China in particular, and in part because he recognizes that we've neglected countries that are with which we share a border or that are only a few hundred miles away in order to pay attention to countries that are 7,000 miles away. My hope is that whoever is in the White House after the inauguration next year will retain that focus, will continue to make investments in the region, and will continue to put the focus on making sure that we live in the safest and most democratic hemisphere in the history of the planet.
Viviana or Ty, any additional?
Yes, so Eliot, that was beautifully said. I will just add to Eliot's wonderful comments that in my opinion, the next leader will have a tremendous impact on our region, even more so after a global pandemic that is hitting the Western Hemisphere countries so badly, specifically at a time when we face malign actors in the Western Hemisphere. I believe it is vital to have a leader whose main priorities include the safety, the stability, and the rule of law for the Western Hemisphere.
Okay. And you did, Ty, I know it's not necessarily Western Hemisphere, but once again, you've worked in a presidential campaign, and so that everyone's listening, regardless of the side of the aisle, once again this year, we're excited that on both camps, we have very high-ranking alumni that are, right there at the table of these campaigns. So I know you had some campaign experience previously in I believe the second Obama campaign.
Yeah, so let me just jump in and just offer a couple of thoughts here. I think in terms of the next administration, what's important, obviously, is leaders that lead with a values-based, kind of moral compass. I think multilateralism is important. I think, strengthening our democratic institutions is important. I also think that economic equity and advancements in that area are equally as important. But I also think that to reaffirm our leadership role in the world, we should be involved in our international commitments. So looking at the Paris Climate Accord, looking at rejoining the UN Human Rights Council at the UN, looking at the Iran nuclear deal, and establishing and reestablishing our relationship with the WHO. Those are all institutions that I think demand and require U.S. involvement and active participation. But speaking on an individual basis, for all of you students that are in Miami at FIU and can vote, I think the biggest area to promote is your civic engagement and making sure that you are registered. Today is the last day in Florida if you're registered there or need to be registered. That is the place for you to be active and show or demonstrate what direction you want to go in the future, or what you want our country to go in the future. So that's the biggest PSA I can make today is using your vote as your voice in this election.
There you go. We're excited. We have dialed in with us tonight one of our exciting alumna that is representative of the amazing talent we have in the think tank world. Ana Quintana is joining us. She's the Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America and the Western Hemisphere at the Heritage Foundation. And in addition to, once again, a great example of a mentor to so many of our alumni, both sides of the aisle, she'll attest, the Heritage has been an amazing pipeline for paid internships here in the district. So thank you, Anna, for Heritage, but floor is yours for a question.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for putting this together and giving me an opportunity to see so many of my friends again. Batilde, great to see you again. Eliot, Viviana, this is such a fun opportunity. And Tyrik, great to meet you. Carlos, if you would permit me, sorry, I just have one quick thing to add just on kind of like what we should expect from the next administration on Western Hem policy. And I think, I do agree on the points that Tyrik, that you brought up on multilateralism. I mean, I think that's something that's so incredibly important. And I think particularly because, coming from an FIU background, coming from South Florida, the issue of Venezuela, obviously it's something that for many of us, it's so personal. And I think, multilateral institutions are only as strong as the member states that are a part of them, and only as strong as the principles that these countries that are pursuing them. And I think one thing that we've seen over these last few years is that that's an area that this administration, and I think that's an area that there's been broad bipartisan consensus where there has been much success and where there's not really much divergence in terms. And I think that's something that we can expect significant continuity, right? And so when we think of this idea of like, all right, let's build upon multilateralism, or like, let's build and continue on multilateralism, or like rather, let's re-engage with our multilateral partners, I don't expect there to be much deviation. Everybody believes in the fact that human rights, basic respect for human rights, like let's not kill political prisoners or political opponents, we're not going to see such a significant shift on that. And then on the belief of the UN Human Rights Council and things like that, it's like, well, do we want the Cuban government, who still imprisons people for being gay and for being Black and for kind of having just, the plurality and diversity that we all believe in, being a part of these organizations? I think so. I think we just kind of need to assess the landscape and believe, the beliefs that we believe in, again, diversity and plurality, are not necessarily compatible with the policies that we want pursued in the region. And I think the health of the region, frankly, is in a much better place because of, again, the policies that this administration has pursued. Whether we, again, like the president or not, we just have to look again at the policies.
So now I get to ask the question that moderators always do, but did you have a question?
But I totally have a question. Yeah, but look, if you're bringing me here, you're ruining my happy hour time. So now this is me taking the prerogative.
A twofer.
Exactly. So now I have a question for Eliot, Tyrik, and Viviana. So in light of the pandemic, right, because of everything that's happening in the Western Hemisphere, do you guys foresee China to change their strategy towards the region, right? We've seen China increasing their engagement with the region, and obviously not much of it has been in a productive manner. And if they are going to change their strategy, in what way do you think it's going to take place?
And if we can, if we just really answer in less than a minute, because we do want to keep things moving along. But who wants to go first?
I can answer in less than 10 seconds. No, they're not going to change their strategy. Their strategy is based on becoming the dominant economic power in the world. That requires being the dominant economic power throughout the world, and that includes Latin America and the Caribbean. So while they may change their tactics, I don't think they're going to change their strategy, and I think we have to continue to be vigilant against what they would like to accomplish here.
Viviana, Tyrik?
And I would just add to Eliot's, Anna, that's an excellent question. We have seen China's efforts to gain a foothold in many nations in the Western Hemisphere on their 5G infrastructure. We recently saw China's fleet was caught in the Galapagos Islands, violating Ecuador's laws. So China is not going to change their behavior. I agree with Eliot that they're going to continue with their predatory practices. And part of the reason, I mean, you know the history. China has enacted legislation, including national security laws that include sweeping requirements on companies that work in China, both domestic and foreign. And for that reason, you have seen Senator Rubio has been a very strong advocate on pushing back on China. And recently, Senator Menendez and Senator Rubio introduced legislation precisely to counter China's activities in the Western Hemisphere.
Ty, any additional thoughts?
Nothing to add.
Okay. We did drop in the, we're proud of Anna, and we dropped in the chat a recent report that she just released earlier this year on developing a coordinated North American economic recovery plan. So please read it, because we're proud of Anna and we're proud of her work at Heritage. Thank you. Let's see. Anna mentioned Batilde Munoz Bogosian that we also have here on the line. Batilde, are you there?
Yes, Carlos.
Batilda's doing amazing work at the OAS and has been there for a good amount of time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? And I think you have a question as well for the
Great. Almost 10 years at the Organization of American States. First part dealing on issues of election observation, and now I'm director for social inclusion, in charge of access to rights and equity for the whole of the hemisphere. So interested in doing internship, any students that have joined the call, please let me know.
Wonderful.
I actually had a question for this excellent panel of colleagues, alumni that are here with us today on Venezuela. I'm actually Venezuelan American myself, and follow the issues both on a personal level, but also because it's part of my agenda at the Organization of American States. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the outlook of potential, hopefully, sooner rather than later, democratic transition in Venezuela. On one hand, how do you see it happening, and if there's anything different that needs to be done to get us to that point? And then also what I call always the most visible manifestation of the national crisis, which is the migration crisis. We have more than 5 million Venezuelans who are displaced. It's the greatest displacement crisis that the region has ever had, and second only to Syria, which has a civil war and is in the middle of a conflict. So how do you see that developing in the near future? And considering that the US has just took over the leadership of the Summit of the Americas process, which may be an interesting place to kind of bring the conversation on these issues forward, and maybe some different type of tactics that can collectively be decided. Do you see that as a good, interesting space to have these conversations?
Thoughts on Venezuela? Viviana, Eliot?
Okay, I take the first one. Hi, Batilde. Thank you for that question.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? So Senator Rubio has taken a lot of work in the Senate with his Senate colleagues in a bipartisan way with regards to Venezuela. Just recently, one of the concerns that he has expressed is with regards to denouncing Maduro regime's efforts to hold legislative elections. I don't know if you have seen, but we have sent letters to the European Union as well as the United Nations, in which we basically we don't agree with these legislative elections unless free and fair and transparent electoral process is in place. According to the Venezuelan constitution, Juan Guaido is the interim president of Venezuela until new legislative elections are held. And the way Maduro has been behaving, especially with undermining independent political parties through a campaign of persecution, jailing political prisoners, and stripping from the power to all the leadership of political parties, including Voluntad Popular, Primera Justicia. Those are things that we are very concerned, and obviously we condemn and we don't agree with. And those are, I believe, the international community should, and the Grupo de Lima should all be together in condemning these actions. And you know, I don't want to take too much time, but one of the things that I was going to mention on the migrant situation, I traveled to Colombia last year, and I was there in the border with Ecuador as well, and I was able to visit a lot of the refugees and migrants in both sides, and it is really a very overwhelming experience, what I was able to see, and especially the conditions that these refugees travel to make it to these countries. Colombia, Ecuador, and many of these neighboring countries of Venezuela are doing an excellent job in providing all the resources and the basic needs, including the church, to the Venezuelan migrants. Secretary Pompeo recently traveled the region, and he announced a new set of humanitarian assistance to help these neighboring countries with the refugees. So it is concerning, and obviously it's an issue that as a nation and as human beings, I think we all feel compelled the need to continue to assist.
Okay. Just to keep things moving, if we don't mind, I did want to, because we do want to keep us on track, I did want to give a chance to introduce Luis Guillermo Solis. He is the 47th president of Costa Rica and has had decades of an academic career that did pass through FIU before and is back here now. But President Solis is the acting director of our Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, and I know he wanted a chance to ask a question and introduce himself to the panel and the audience.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations for pulling together this wonderful group of speakers and FIU graduates who are with us. I would like to change the overall discussion a bit to a more closer moment in the lives of the participants. They are all leaders. They are all extraordinary decision makers. And I would like to know from their own experience, what kind of profile and qualities do they expect from the people they hire? It is commonly said that 50% of all the the positions, the labor positions in the future are not even invented. But what about the personal qualities that they seek for? What are those conditions that they would like to see in people they hire? And thank you again.
Tyrik, want to kick us off? In a minute or less, please.
Yeah, no, sure. I've had the opportunity to do hiring across a global enterprise, and I think the key qualities that come across to me when I evaluate someone's performance or the background, I think intellectual curiosity is a pretty big factor, because if you're interested and you're curious and you want to know more, you're asking more questions, the better suited you are to really kind of take in, the information that's being presented to you. I think good listening also is a huge factor. But in terms of other characteristics, integrity is a key quality among folks that I am interviewing or engaging in conversations about their career. I think the most important thing is I ask folks to explain to me how they've overcome an instance of adversity, and the key component of that is resilience. And I think trying to understand the nature of what someone faces in terms of struggles and what how they approach that challenge, in a successful way matters to me, and it really demonstrates their resilience.
Eliot?
So I would agree with everything that Ty said, but I would add that for me, I'm actually currently in a hiring process because one of the folks that works in my small office has just left, and we're in the process of retaining her. And I'll tell you what I'm looking for right now. Then number one is an ownership mentality. Someone that comes in and takes the problems of the office and makes them their problems. And it doesn't just think about how to get an issue off of their desk and onto mine, but rather thinks about how we're going to work through it and get a solution, ultimately for our client, which is the US government. Second, someone that has the ability really to step into a room and represent the United States. I mean, that's a little bit unique to our role as a representative office, but I mean, it's our job to speak for our fellow Americans. And so I need someone that's able to command the room and do that. And then the third is I was really struck when I took this position 2.5 years ago at what a very tight-knit and really well-functioning office it was. I inherited a group of people that had been hired by my predecessors largely, and they are a fantastic group, including, I mentioned Laura Ospina, who's one of my assistants, who's an FIU grad. And so I view it as one of my chief duties in the office to leave it at least as good as I found it. And so someone that has a value of teamwork, someone that is willing to cover the other people in the office, to chip in, even when something might fall outside of their particular role, just because that's what's needed at that moment for us to achieve our group mission. That to me is one of the very most important things that you can have.
Viviana?
I would just add a few things because I think Tyrik and Eliot said it all, but I think the person, one of the most important qualities that I see in a person is the ability to be a team player, to be flexible and able to work under stress, a lot of stress. So I would just add those three.
There you go. Very good question, Presidente Solis. Glad you asked that. And speaking of the Latin American and Caribbean Center, I do want to introduce someone that is no stranger to Latin American Caribbean issues. He's the founding director of Lac. And of course, he's also our 5th president, Mark B. Rosenberg. I know he wanted a chance to greet our panel and our audience.
Yeah, happy homecoming, everybody. Wow, what a different kind of homecoming we're having, but nonetheless a homecoming that matters because we recognize the value of higher ed, and we recognize the value of being a Panther. And Tyrik, congratulations to you, and Eliot, congratulations to you, and Viviana, good to see you, and Anna, thank you so much for all you're doing, and Batilda, really proud of your accomplishments. To our students, the individuals that you see here really represent the very best of who we are and what we do. And what binds them together is that they want to make the world a better place. And really, in many ways, that's how and why FIU was created in the first place. Did you know that the Secretary General of the United Nations actually did the official groundbreaking of FIU way back? His name was U Thant. The only time the Secretary General of the UN, best I can tell, has ever been in Miami. And the whole idea behind an FIU was to use the talent that we had to provide solutions, to help people, to make the world a better place. So when Eliot says he wants to leave it better than he found it, that resonates. Because really, that's what we are all about at FIU. And Carlos, and to your team, Eric, thank you so much for bringing us all together. There are challenges today, but look, the truth is, if we keep the faith, if we find ways to help and support each other, if we have a vision for the future that is brighter than the vision for today, we're gonna be fine. And I ask you as alums and as students who soon will be alums, and find a way to do better and to give back to our institutions so that we get stronger and better every day. If that happens, then our graduates, 18,000 this year, 18,000 graduates this year, will have the same bright futures that Tyrik and Eliot and Anna and Viviana have. So I want to thank you all. Happy homecoming. Remember FIU, remember the name, support FIU, and have a great week. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, President Rosenberg. And I know that Eliot does need to be pulling away, but I'm going to message with him in subliminal ways in case he wants to make any special announcement here this evening.
So I'll do two things. Number one is I will end the speculation created by you, Carlos, earlier, and let everyone know that my favorite FIU professor was, of course, drum roll, Dean John Stack, who taught me constitutional law. And so I want to thank John really for launching my career, for being a true mentor and friend for 25 years and counting, 26 years, I think, and counting, but also for introducing me to my wife, who was also a student in that class. And my wife, Nilda, is also a graduate of FIU and is now currently the highest ranking woman at the State Department outside of our ambassador to the United Nations, who works sort of in New York at the UN mission. So I intentionally exclude her. And when you exclude her, Nilda is now the highest ranking woman at the State Department. And John, we owe it all to you. And that's not an exaggeration in the slides. Thank you, Eliot. And thank you for joining us tonight. I know you need to get going. I did want to mention, speaking of our high ranking alumni, Batilda mentioned Venezuela and brought on that. Our great partner at USAID is now being led by an FIU alum. John Barza is the acting administrator there, and we have a handful of other high-ranking alumni there. But it gives me an honor, before we end, to introduce our Vice President of Governmental Relations, who definitely wanted to thank this panel and folks for your commitment to what we do in Washington and advocating for us. Michelle Palacio.
Thank you, Carlos. Good evening, everyone, and happy homecoming. I wanted to make sure to give my own thanks to our panel. They have shown some light on important issues for us tonight, and of course, are continually active with our Washington programs and mentoring students that intern there. But also, each of them has helped us open new doors to advance our faculty research and build a national profile. As FIU becomes laser focused on achieving top 50 public university status, we have no doubt that we will ascend quickly because of great friends like Viviana, Tyrik, and Eliot. And a personal point of privilege, I want to thank our incredible team in FIU and DC, Carlos and Eric. And now it's an honor to introduce one of our most critical partners and an inspiration to so many students and FIU alumni, the Dean of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, Dr. John Stack.
Michelle, thank you so much. I have to tell you, I'm bursting with pride. With Eliot, with Tyrik, with Anna, Batilda, Viviana. So what makes us special? I think our diversity, the courage that you and your families have had, an enduring belief in your ability to make change and your power to do what you think is right. No professor could be more indebted than I am to the students that I've had. And you know, it's not one side of the desk. You have no idea the impact that you've had on me, each in your way. So Carlos, my gratitude to Ruth and Glenn Hamilton for our Hamilton Scholars, for the incredible energy of our Model UN team, which continues to this day. I'm teaching it tomorrow night, along with our former student director. but a belief in what FIU does and will continue to do. I'm so proud of all of you. Thank you so much, Carlos.
Thank you, Dean Stack. And we're so glad to partner with the Green School in getting a lot of this amazing talent up here as much as we can. So I wanted to thank our panelists, Eliot, Tyrik, Viviana, Dean Stack, President Rosenberg, Michelle, all of our wonderful audience members. We're going to end with a video that is focused on the Latin American and Caribbean Center and our benefactor there, the Greens. But as a quick commercial, on October 26th, our good friend Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, who, proud FIU alumna, once again, very active in global affairs and the Western Hemisphere when she was the first woman chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. We are featuring her in a discussion with our Frost Art Museum on campus. They are currently running an exhibit celebrating the centennial of women's suffrage, and many of our alumni have been involved with roles that they play in the organization up here. But October 26th, of course, virtually. Tune into a great conversation with Ileana Ross-Lehtinen. Other than that, I want to thank you all for joining us this homecoming week. It's always a great reminder to all of us that not only do we have amazing students that are learning and steeping themselves in so many of these issues, but they ultimately graduate and they end up taking amazing jobs and roles to really make an impact in the world. And that is what we're about here in Washington, D.C. and in Miami, of course. So thank you all and have a great, safe rest of the fall and a wonderful homecoming week. Be sure to enjoy all the other activities virtually. Thank you all.
I grew up in El Salvador, so I have seen firsthand what violence is and the impact of violence in the lives of Central Americans. I started doing research on gangs in Central America 20 years ago, but in 2016, I have the opportunity to expand my research in Central America from FIU and interview more than 1,000 gang members, former gang members and current gang members. A lot of the violence that is occurring in Central America with the gangs and criminal groups are pushing people out of the region. And that obviously is impacting the US and the whole region, the southern border. The more we can help Central Americans from here, based on our own research, based on our proposals of public policy, the best they can do in their own lives over there in Central America. I think the contribution of the Green family to LAC and to FIU are very important to our work and to the impact that we have at the global level, you know, in other countries in terms of research, in terms of generating knowledge of the problems that are affecting our societies.
If someone really wants to see the impact that their dollars have in investing in a university, FIU is certainly the place to do it. FIU is the anchor institution in Miami, and Miami's the gateway to Latin America and the Caribbean. It's critical that we form deep global relationships and help to train our leaders that will help unite our hemisphere. We play a major role in conducting research, writing public policy. We offer diplomacy labs and internships for our students so they can work side by side with people from other cultures. FIU has more than 230 faculty members dedicated to Latin America, which is more than any other university in the country. We are investing in a just, peaceful, and prosperous world. We're all in this together.
Thank you all. Have a good night.